It's been a few months since the season from hell ended. The draft has come and gone, and even the summer league is done with, and Klay has dipped. At the time of making my previous video, speculation was rife and many were calling for the Warriors and Klay to go their separate ways, but I never really thought it would come to fruition. Dallas got themselves a steal, and despite being 35 and closer to the end, he's without a doubt the best three-point shooter on their team. An upgrade offensively on Derrick Jones, but defensively, well, I'm not too sure. But that's not our concern anymore. I'm just happy the Lakers didn't get him. In the following video, we're going to talk about all that's occurred over the last couple months and this upcoming make or break season. Now that I look back, it's clear to see why Myers left. You could see that the ship was rocking way too hard and the end was near. The whole thing about needing a new challenge and a change of scenery is dead, because who leaves the Warriors for the Commanders? Anyway, Dunleavy now has the reins and is doing a decent job with what he was presented. The highest payroll in the league and guys getting paid well above their playing level, especially Klay. Obviously the Warriors paid him out of necessity back in 2019, because despite the ACL, they knew teams would be lined up for him with Max's all on the table, and they kind of owed it to him anyway. The guy played a major role in winning 3 titles up until that point.
Wary of putting him back in.
They see the awkward landing, and right away.
After this Durant situation.
One thing to note is that Klay's contract was heavily back-ended, and once he signed it, he wouldn't see the floor again until January of 2022, dropping a scrappy 22 points in his return against the Cavs. The stars aligned, and his comeback season coincided with the team winning its 4th championship in 7 years. All of that really masked a lot of things. Besides being able to go off for the occasional 30-point game and a 3-point shot that was still one of the best, his defensive prowess was not there. At one point, being an All-NBA defender and being able to guard 1-4, you could see the injuries really hindered it, but it didn't matter, because as long as that the 3 was falling, the 2 spot was always going to be his. You also had JP and Wiggs, who were hooping their backs off, especially JP. That final month of the regular season when Steph was out injured, Poole's high-level play ensured the team finished 3rd in the regular season, and such was his level of play, they had Steph coming off the bench against Denver in the first round. With the way JP was cooking those guys, I thought another 5-year dynasty was upon us, until Uncle Day-Day took matters into his own hands. Poole never looked like himself again, and the shot chucking got worse. It probably boiled down to the fact that Draymond got off with a slap on the wrist. Anyway, Klay was now back in the driver's seat as a number 2 option, and let's just say that Whip wasn't going anywhere too fast. Now the biggest difference between pre and post injury Klay was the absurd amount of shot chucking going on. His head just wasn't screwed on right, as he kept trying to prove time and time again that he was still that guy. Now that I think about it, those 2 major injuries took away so much from him. Today he has the same vert as Jokic and is a non-factor on the open floor, sometimes even smoking open layups. And after turning down a contract extension 12 months ago, the murmurs became louder and louder. It seemingly got worse. With all the rumors, it seemed a sure bet he was heading to sunny Florida, where 90s box scores seemed to be the norm, until news broke of his deal with the Mavs.
Klay Thompson's 13-year career in Golden State, 4 championships, is now over.
It really came out of nowhere. The finer details of the contract were really intriguing. $50 million for 3 years, a downgrade from the 2-year $48 that was on the table for him from Lacob and Myers. But as the saying goes, yesterday's price ain't today's price. Now we saw in the interview what Klay's reasons for leaving were, but there was definitely a lot more to it. If the rumors are true, then I think it has a lot to do with this guy. Now Pods was an anomaly for Warriors rookies in the Steve Kerr era. First-year guys hardly get game time, let alone usurping a future Hall of Famer. I mean, even JK in year 2 was warming the bench in favor of these guys, who aren't even in the league anymore. But Pajimski was different, man. Even Lacob said the coach couldn't keep him off the floor. And if the rumors are true, the Warriors' plan for Klay, if brought back, was to elevate Pods permanently to the 2 spot and have Splash Bro number 2 come off the bench. Whether he felt disrespected or
I guess his feelings just got hurt.
Something had to give. Klay opted against coming back, and while I would have preferred him in Orlando or somewhere in the East, like I said, I'm just glad it wasn't the Lakers. It's been no secret the Warriors had invested heavily into the squad the last couple of years. In the last 3 years alone, the front office re-signed Steph, Draymond, Wiggins, and JP, who's now in DC. Those 4 alone combined for over $500 million in contracts for the next 4 to 5 years, meaning Laker was paying almost $500 million in salary and luxury tax combined annually. Dunleavy came on board and knew this wasn't feasible. I mean, Boston is about to be paying that and then some for the next few years, something you can deal with when you've got a genuine contender who's top 3 favorites league-wide, not when you have a team struggling to beat Sacramento.
And they chant "Light the beam" here in Sacramento, and they're going to do just that.
And the moves made in the last few months signal just that. This team wasn't very active in the draft, picking up a bench warmer in Waters from OKC for next to nothing, and 7-foot shooting Dutchman Quinton Post with the 55th pick out of Boston College. Both moves were made with salary constraints in mind, and neither of these two are projected to be major contributors this upcoming season. Next up, the big boys Clay and CP3. Besides age and the regression that comes with it, paying a combined $75 million a year for them was not worth it. But I must say, CP3 did make a good impact on the bench, especially with Jackson Davis. Now he's going to be feeding Wemby those same lobs. Out the door is also Saric, who's now in Denver, and Garuba, who I think headed back to Europe. Which brings us to the additions. For what seemed like a low price, front office was able to add DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield, and Slow-Mo, all of whom signed to what seemed to be extremely team-friendly deals heading forward, significantly reducing the luxury tax. And as things currently sit, the team is just below the first apron by around $500,000. And despite all the murmurs and complaints from Warriors fans and guys in the media, on paper this team is better than last year. Melton is a high-level role player when healthy, and it seems like the only thing preventing him from being placed in the same categories as KCP or Bruce Brown is his health issues. Last season in Philly he missed 44 games with a back issue, but at a bargain price of $12 million for 1 year, you take that gamble, because if he puts the injury trouble behind him, he could really ball out. As it stands, he's in the top 2 best defensive guards in the team, and probably ahead of GP2 in the pecking order, simply due to his superior offensive quality, ability to handle the ball, and a 3-point that is respected by the opposition. Next up is Buddy Hield, who brings supreme outside shooting. In fact, no one rivals Steph in threes made over the last 5 years except him. And while he's no match for prime Clay, that type of shooting is valuable to any team. But on the other side of the ball, he isn't much of a defender, something that shouldn't be a factor in the right lineup. Lastly, there's Slow-Mo, the dude with the most unusual jumper going around. At 6'9", he's more of a point forward in the mold of Draymond, where you can back him guarding the 4 and 5, something that was on show in Game 2 of the second round against Denver, when he was elevated to the starting lineup. One could argue the team played better with him there over Rudy. And while he isn't a shooter, he is fundamentally elite, does the little things that contribute to winning, and can be trusted with ball in hand. Also an underrated ball handler, who has an extremely good assist to turnover ratio. All in all, it's a nice little haul that will give the Warriors the needed depth that other teams around them lack, but still, the top end of this team is very unsettled and thin. After Steph, it was unclear who the best player was last season. It kept chopping and changing on a game-to-game basis. Some days it was Clay, sometimes Pods, sometimes Wiggs, and by year's end it was Kuminga. And while Draymond might be the second most important to this team's fortunes, that doesn't qualify him enough for being second best. His lack of scoring output determines that, even in his 2016 days, he wasn't revered as a scorer, rather someone who connects everyone on the court and is a jack of all trades. As it currently stands, JK is primed to take that number 2 option by the neck and make it his. When Paul George opted out of his contract with the Clippers, the Warriors wanted him, and the feeling was mutual. Balmer and front office wanted JK in some picks, which the Warriors swiftly declined. It resulted in the Clippers essentially letting George walk out for free instead of doing a sign and trade with Dunleavy. This mentality goes to show the trust this team has in JK. You see what happens when you blindly send young talent away for aging stars, with how SGA turned out. And while I don't expect JK to be an MVP level player this year, it's not worth throwing away such a vital asset for a guy who's 34 and not a proven winner. In saying that, there are many aspects of his game that JK needs to work on, as alluded to by Steve Kerr, and if the walk backs the talk, we can expect some high-level hoops from him. He's played the 4 for most of his short career, but to get the most out of this team, he needs to play the 3, Dre at the 4, and Jackson Davis at the 5. But only time will tell if his shooting has improved that much. Everyone looks good on the IG highlights, but time will tell if he can back it up on the court. Next off the bat is Pods, who I honestly had no clue who he was prior to the draft, and at the time questioned why we didn't select Whitmore, and I soon found out why. That 19th pick honestly feels like a steal, and while I don't really see all NBA level ball in his future, to put it simply, he's just a winner and the type of player that wins you titles due to his tenacity, technical ability, high IQ, and not to mention his underrated shooting, which we'll see a whole lot more of. Judging by how he played at Summer League, he looks primed to take another league. I wouldn't put it past him to make a jump like the one Jordan Poole had in 21-22. His draftmate Jackson Davis was probably even more of a steal, and as the season went on, he made sure Iron Man Looney was glued to the bench and gave the team an inside presence that had been lacking for some years now. Finally, we have the returning crew of Wiggs, GP2 and Moody. Now in my last video, I honestly thought Wiggs would be one of the first players out the door following his horrid play last season, but it seems like there were no buyers. However, the personal issues regarding his late father's ailing health clearly messed with him these last 2 seasons, but we all love a redemption story. So Andrew, if you're hearing this, please give us two-way Wiggs again.
Brunson defends, snaps it outside to Wiggins. Goes by Poole. Drops the sledgehammer! But they're going to rope it away.
Now with Moody, you have possibly the unluckiest dude out there. There isn't a whole lot to his game, but he is fundamentally solid, makes the right plays, rebounds well, and has a respectable shot. But for some reason, Steve refuses to play him. But it's the final year of his rookie deal, and he deserves consistent minutes even if it's from the bench. He's not the fastest or the most athletic, but those long ass arms have had dudes struggling to make a shot on him. Up next you got GP2, who opted into the final year of his contract. Another guy with injury worries who's always missing games, but should he be healthy, he and Melton are lockdown guards and provide significant punch from the bench. And finally, you have Draymond can't keep my hands to myself green. This man seemingly hasn't learnt his lesson from the Jordan Poole incident, cleaning up dudes left and right, getting himself suspended, and hindering his team's chances. Whenever he is on the court, he affects winning, finishing third behind Pods and Steph for plus minus. And as frustrating a player Draymond is, you can see why, despite all his baggage, the Warriors chose him over Jordan Poole. He's just a winning player that does all the 1%ers which are often overlooked, and does it in a way that makes opponents respect him and coaches game plan against him. Obviously there's still some weeks to go before the start of the season, or the season may have already started, but if this is the squad in its final form leading up to October, then I believe it is a slight upgrade on last season. One major improvement is the depth of this team. In fact, this team probably has the best depth in the entire West. But without a clear-cut number 2 option yet, the debate for who makes the starting lineup will be a hot topic all the way until after training camp. But one thing this team can't afford is a repeat of last year, where the starting 5 kept chopping and changing well into the season, and we saw how that ended. And regardless of all the pessimism from sports media and Warriors fans, this roster isn't half bad, but maybe I'm just being blindly optimistic or trying to convince myself. But if last year's roster, despite having clunking Clay and an old-ass CP3, was able to win 43 games, there's no reason why this current one can't churn out 50 wins.